this call, the session has been recorded. As you can see, you've been prompted. If you don't wish to be on the recording, I just want to ask you to like switch off your camera. But if you're fine, we'd love to see your faces. So please stay on the camera as well. We'd love to see your expressions. I will be sharing a link to the Mentimeter so that we can do a little upvoting of your questions. So try to go into that link and post your questions as we go along. And then I will bring up the questions later on after Erik and Pernille has done their presentation. And I think that's it, right? So everybody ready? I hand over to Erik and Pernille.
And I will just leave the stage shortly and just give it to Pernille for her to share her wisdom. So Pernille, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to be with you today. I'm Pernille, and I am from the OSTERGAARD organization in Denmark, a small organization of approximately 100 people. And I will be sharing some of our experience with Teal here in Denmark in the local affiliate. You could say, why Teal? That is one of the things that we have been talking about is, of course, a sustainable business. How are you going to build a sustainable business in the future? Maybe some of you know that Roche is celebrating 125 years this year. In Denmark, our local affiliate just celebrated 50 years. So we are, of course, looking into the future saying, how are we going to be here for the next many, many years? So it is about sustainability. It's about being relevant for the market in the future. And I want to talk a little bit more about the why, because in the diagnostics business, it's the overall market trends are very much in digitalization. It's automation. It's the big market trends about the population getting older that are driving some of these needs. And that makes our business extremely complex. And with that complexity, we need to think about our business and how we operate in a new way so that we are able to take decisions faster and that we can work in a different way. When we look into what the next generations also would like to see in a workspace, and also thinking about more generations being at work at the same time, how do you then make this fantastic workplace that everyone wants to go for? Bill also said the feeling that you actually run your own business. How do you prepare that? So that was some of our thinkings when we started looking into our strategy back in 2019. So all started with strategy. And actually we realized that it was only small adjustment on the actual strategy that we needed, but there were things that were not really working for us. It was like that the commercial part of our organization and the ones that work more with development, we were growing away from each other or moving away from each other. So we wanted to look into how we could set up things that were more customer centric, and we wanted to have an organization where we could be agile, make decisions faster at the right level. We also started thinking in network-based organizations because of the complexity in the business. The whole service and IT side, we cannot run that in a local affiliate on our own. So how do you build that? How do you build a North Star around agility and network-based? So that was some of our thinking. That was what we we said, okay, we will start running sprints with our organization, and that we did back in October 2019. We had 5 teams looking into customer segments, looking into sales processes, looking into the customer experience, and then we had 2 teams working with how to operate the organization, how to set up the organization in the future. And one of the teams quickly actually got inspired by Frederick Laloux and the Teal principles, and started working on that. And that was really, really inspiring, and all actually quite quickly said, yes, that is the way we want to go. And I think the leadership team were more like, okay, can we really manage that in this complex business? Because it's also really, really critical to think about if it's full teal blown you want to go, or do you need to think about a nuance of teal in an organization? So we set up the whole project. We started the implementation back in August 19. We were ready to go, and we of course also had some challenges on the way, because originally when we planned, we were almost ready, and COVID came. And as a leadership team, you would normally come together with all your people to start executing on how to set up a new organization where you are together, right? So to do this in a virtual setting, that was maybe some of the most scaring moments for me. But after looking into it, we said, no, we want to go in this way. So we need to do it in a different way. We need to do it in smaller groups. We need to do it virtually. So we actually had the courage, which is one of our big values at Roche, to do this, to execute on that change and start a transformation journey in the middle of a pandemic situation. Maybe also one of the moments that I'm most proud about. We also, I mean, I only show here on the slide the first part of the journey, because it's also a journey that never ends. It will be small iterations, and we will adjust as we go on. That is the whole principle about this. And I want to share how our setup actually looks right now. And this is just a template, because actually we decided to move the general manager down in the bottom so that it didn't look so traditional. But we have prepared it. Our organization is like a donut, and we have the centers and chapters in the outer ring, and then we have the commercial part of the organization in the inner ring, also signaling the customer-centric organization. The green dots are the ones that we are running as self-led teams from the beginning. Other chapters and other dots have a pre-assigned leader, but what is really, really important is that everyone are working under the self-leading principles. So, I mean, leaders are not the ones that are doing the decisions. Decisions are done at the level where the knowledge is. Some of the things that we have been using and that have had significant importance in our journey is, of course, the inspiration book about reinventing organization. It's also about working with the mindset. That is clear realization that is probably the most important thing. Part of creating psychological safety is really, really important. That's also linked to how you run decisions. It's about feeling safe. It's about having an environment where you can try and fail and then try again. We have created a booklet that also describes our North Star, about becoming this agile and networked based organization with the Teal as the leading star. It's also describing our guiding principles and also guardrails so that we ensure that people feel safe in how to do their jobs, how to interact. I think one of the big learnings, and I will come to learnings now, is that good enough for now is safe enough to try. We have been coming from this culture with we wanted to do everything 100%, and that we really need to work with. That is a big learning. So if I should look a little bit more into the learnings, we in the beginning we had put aside trainings for all people, and we didn't make it mandatory from the beginning, but we realized that we needed actually to cut down on the numbers that we set up for people, and then we needed to make them mandatory. We also needed to do a lot more coaching. Originally, we have, of course, assigned coaching to all teams, also the ones that are totally self-led, so that they feel supported. But we needed additional resource for a period of time. Psychological safety, I've mentioned, it's really a key element of preparing for this. And then the guardrails have also, I mean, we actually did put a lot of efforts into describing guardrails. That has, we have learned that was an important work to do so that people feel safe. It is painful, and there are days where it's painful, but there are also really amazing days. And I want to share with you that especially when the COVID really broke out, we realized that being able to form teams that could easily and quickly come together and one with the launch of a new diagnostics test or solve a problem and then resolve afterwards, that was actually where we really learned that this principle is really valuable for us. It was exactly what we needed. In the traditional way, it would have been technical driven and we would have missed out a lot, so that we realized that we can move much quicker. We can make quicker decisions when we work in this way. And yes, it is a transformation. It is a journey. It's not a change. It takes 2 years just to get us going, and then we will iterate and adjust and learn more and adjust again. That is what the journey is all about. So it's a good one that hopefully will never end. So with that, I will give over to Erik.
Thanks, Pernille. What she just shared, I think that is a good example of how to actually work with the Teal transformation inside a bigger organization. And when I talk about Teal for real, of what really goes on inside the larger organizations, it is the first mental image that I get is this image that I'm sharing right now is the combination of, on one hand, having something that is predictable, the machine, something that Bill also, or that Bill was challenged about earlier today. How do you handle the regulation and at the same time have something that is way more dynamic, here illustrated with a lady with the soap bubbles? How do you actually do that? Looking at something like Agile or Teal or self-led organizations or self-led teams or whatever it is that is more dynamic and fluid, how do you do that and make sure that you have a running business? You have global finance, you have regulated industries and whatever. That's the thing that to me is really going on in the larger organizations right now. It's the combination. And when we look at these combinations, there's some frictions that appear. And looking at these frictions or tensions, as Tim Olschinger talked about earlier, there are frictions inside the teams that we need to talk about. That's number one. A team is a bubble here. There's frictions between the teams that we need to talk about. How do these teams actually coordinate? And then there's frictions between, well, you can see the teal world illustrated with a lady with the soap bubbles and the orange world. So how do you actually do that? Where does these frictions appear, and how do you overcome them? One thing is, as Pernille said, to create a business unit and affiliate something where people work with Teal. That's hard enough, but it's also hard to understand how to do that inside a larger organization. Pernille showed their way of designing or drawing the organization setup, and the illustration of the donut. I have seen that appear in different shapes and forms in different organizations at the same time. I have seen that appear when people start drawing their organization in a non-hierarchical way. There's like an epiphany moment, because that kind of illustration is a mirror of their leadership style. So when you give a pen to a leader, say, dear leader, can you draw on the whiteboard how your organization actually look? When they start drawing it in a non-hierarchical way, something is happening. And I have seen this, and it's always like they have the teams in the middle, teams that are loosely coupled or tightly coupled or self-led or whatnot. And then you have this kind of, as Pernille said, the donut ring that supports the organization. What I'm curious to understand is, then there's all this orange world around it. How do you understand the friction between what goes on inside the donut and around the donut? That's really interesting. And that thinking about the friction is actually scalable from the single team with that context to the business unit and that context to the affiliate and that context. So the understanding of how do you make different worlds collaborate or collide and get some either good friction or bad friction out of it, that's what I'm curious about. The blueprint for doing that could look like this. So in the middle, we place a self-managed delivery unit. It could be a Teal dot, it could be a self-led organization, a business unit or whatever, something that is confined to a culture that is more self-led or self-driven. Around that, you have a lot of culture that we need to discuss. So what's the overall purpose of the organization? How can you support that? Do you actually know that? In the middle, how do you describe the psychological safety that makes sure or enables us to have not only a good culture, but also fellowship and belonging? And in the top right, you have individual coaching and stewardship. Everybody in this area needs to have an individual coach. It could be your old manager or old leader that now has a new role, or it could be somebody that you choose yourself, somebody who can guide you through this. And when we work in this upper row is normally the easiest to actually maneuver in when we talk about this. It becomes tougher and tougher the lower down we come here. The second row is about making decisions. And I believe both Daniela and Pim and Tim talked and Bill talked about that in their session. We need to make sure who actually makes the decisions and how do we distribute that. If we fully delegate, if we fully talk about full delegation into the self-managed delivery unit, yes, so how do we agree on that? What kind of updated agreements do we make with our stakeholders? And what I have also learned that this is absolutely not black and white. There are some people, when you work in self-managed delivery unit, could somebody mute? I think it's Mark Green.
I apologize for that. If you're not speaking, may I ask you to mute yourself, please? We have someone from the team. Can you please mute?
The host can mute participants.
I have muted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Continue,
yes,
Erik, apologies.
That's okay. Things happen when we are so many people getting together. It's okay. This is not black and white. It's not either delegate or not, either distribute the mandate or not. There's so many nuances. And the nuances, as Pernille also talked about, is something that we really need to talk about. What kind of delivery mandate do we want to give to the team, and maybe the team is not ready for receiving that delivery mandate. So you need some kind of negotiation when it comes to the nuances of decision making. Also, any kind of leadership group or steering committee or whatever it is now changes the role from steering to providing advice. So you change all the names from steering committees to advisory boards or something similar that illustrates what kind of role these people have. And then there's all the things going on between the teams. It's, okay, what is the white space? What is the gap between the teams? And how do we close that gap? Is that by moving information or feelings or learnings between the teams? What kind of rhythms do you have to meet up and coordinate and synchronize your work and synchronize your worldviews? How do you engage with the stakeholders in a rhythmical way so that they also feel involved? And lastly, you need to map out with a lot of soap bubbles, with a lot of teal dots in an orange world, you need to map out your network. Who are the influencers? Who are the information hubs that can really make sure that these worlds, they tie together and not only drift autonomously their own way? And I know that some of the organizations that I work with, they use this for making a heat map of the organization. So you can for each of these self-led teams, you can actually ask them in each of the 8 boxes around on a smiley level, from sad smiley to happy smiley, how do you perceive your surrounding? So it's a perception-based measurement. Do you perceive your ecosystem around you in a way so that you can be a teal dot within an maybe otherwise more rigid world? So this is like, you can use it to heat map all your organization. The last thing I would say when we talk about friction is that it always appears in the interfaces. Friction, you can tell the friction by looking at different languages, different terminologies. Some people call it KPIs, some call it OKRs, some call it that we measure, some call it that we observe, but different terms, they collide. And that's where you need to stop and say, okay, can I lubricate this friction? Different culture, different mindset, different approaches collide, different ways of following up on the measurements, and different titles and different roles also collide. Like, are you a chapter lead or senior vice president? Does it matter? Yes, it does, because you need to understand the language that you're talking with. And there's a lot of lubrication that you can add to this. To invite to dialogue is the obvious one, to invite to participation, to actually try to speak the other one's language, and then talk about the translation. What kind of ambassadorship can we have when we lubricate this? Lean forward, explain what goes on. As we also said, have a nice physical representation. It actually works. It sounds rudimentary, but actually making something that is a physical handout has turned out in several places to be very beneficial. And then last, be patient, and have persistence. That's definitely my learnings when it comes to the lubrication of it. And yeah, this is really what goes on in the organizations when we talk about Teal. It is a combination of Teal and the friction that is that's going on. So with that, Ria, I think we need to jump back in and let's have some debate.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pernille and Erik. Well, that was a hell lot of information to digest in 20 minutes, but thank you so much for presenting it in such a compact and concise way and very clear presentation. Thank you. We have around 12 questions that are coming up, and I'll try to bring in as many as we can, and let's try to answer as many as we can. And if not, let's stay with those questions and let's get them answered when we go into the community, the conversation cafes later on, a bit later on today. But yeah, let me start off with the first most voted question. Roche is a huge company. How have you handled the DIA's transformation, DS transformation, I guess, and the changed architecture in your collaboration with different parts of the organization that are still in the traditional structure?
Yeah, it's of course we are in the middle of it, because then the Danish organization started a little bit earlier than the rest of the diagnostics division worldwide. We actually prepared our organization quite a lot, also about being able to realize that they run ahead, that they will meet the rest of the world in a different way, because even that the whole rush are working outside the same principle about agility and being networked, we will still have different nuances. Teal and self-leadership will still be somehow interpreted in a different way if you are in Germany, or if you are in Denmark, or if you are in Brazil. And we just need to prepare our organization and our colleagues that there will be differences, there will be nuances, and maybe that's also a strength.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And for such a huge feat as a transformation of this magnitude, of this size, truly you need some external inspiration. I just wanted to check in, like, did you use external coaching, consultancy? What kind of external help did you have to establish, one, the psychological safety, but also everything else that goes around the transformation to kind of establish that? And I know that coaching, there's also a comment here, the word coach is so misused in organizations, right? So there's a whole lot of mentorship, a whole lot of inspiration and coaching definitely that is needed. How much of that, and I know, Erik, you're working with Pernille, so there definitely is some external help, but to what extent is this driven externally?
Well, it is something that we have worked closely together with. I think we have intensely worked a year, and then it kind of dipped on when things were settling down. As Pernille says, it is at least a 2-year journey to get to work with the habits and all of that, and to have somebody who can share with you absolutely what not to do. I think that's important, to have somebody to say that this, I can perceive this will go wrong, so you should do this instead. I think that's vital.
It's also about building the toolbox and having inspiration for that. And Erik has been a big support for us, and yes, intensively for 1 year. We have also engaged with agile coaches that are supporting our people. We realized quite quickly that we would not have internal resources enough in Denmark to support all. So we have built that, but again, like with Erik, intense for 1 year, and then we have a plan where we outphase, and then we do the next iteration, right? So it's really, really important that you have a good plan where you also think about how the next round of next 90 days would look like. What is your focus?
Yeah, I love the nimble planning. 90 days is so unheard of in large corporate. It's always like, how does my whole year look like? And you need to plan your holidays before the first few. I mean, I come from that originally, so I know how it feels like. And maybe you've discussed it, if you touched on it a little bit, like you talked about the donut structure, and certainly there are details in it that you didn't share a little, I mean, you didn't go deeper. But there's a question here about, like, what are the significant limitations, guardrails, restrictions when you started defining that future state? Was there anything like that?
It of course started with our whole license to operate, about compliance, all these things. I mean, that is cut in stone. It's non-negotiable. To take a concrete example, it's also how you when all the basics and regulations are in place. I mean, I take that, right? But think about, for example, how we spend our money, how we do cost planning. Originally, we split it up and gave a department some money, and I mean, now we don't even have that plan. All people know how many money they can spend, And if they have to go above that level and do an investment, then we have an advisory board that you present and pitch your idea for, and then the decision can be made. So it's a totally different way of working, which is collectively also so that it gives so much more insight to the organization.
Yeah.
Let me answer that question in a different way, because I actually heard it differently.
Okay.
But it's your answer. I heard that as being, okay, what kind of design are we going for, and what are the limitations for that? I heard it. So okay, how do you do the transformation?
Exactly.
And what are the limits for that? And
Yeah.
I think size is something that people rarely talk about, because the scalability. I'm going to say something and I'm going to be quoted on later. Because Teal really scales badly. It really does. I have the feeling from doing this so many years in so many organizations, in so many cultures, that Teal has a scalability issue, and it's about social capital. It's about how far out can you reach when you are an influencer. Maybe if you're Bill Anderson, you have way bigger reach than other today have. But there's really something about the social capital and the influential reach you have through your relationships. That means when you talk about doing transformations from orange to teal, there's a scalability issue, and I will absolutely go for when you talk about business units above 150, above 200 employees, it's going to be really hard. So you need to limit your size of your donut to something that is smaller than that for all, in order to create a psychological safety, a belonging, some organizational structures and mechanisms that are healthy and relevant to them. So create something that is relevant locally enough, and then understand what is then the donut ring and the friction, the new modern orange, that paves the way to the next donut. So we have donut, or teal, and between all that you have some modern orange, because scalability issue will hit you. That's
that's a very interesting twist to the whole story, Erik, and I really appreciate that you mentioned this. Too often we underestimate the power of scalability, and the thing is, we are working with large organizations, so scalability is a huge factor.
Yeah, we with the in the speak with Bill and Pim and Daniela, we also talked about the principles of Teal and how to understand the mindset and the principles. Honestly, that scales. The principles, the mindset, the approach scale, but translating that into local protocols does not scale. It has to be local, it has to be relevant to you as a human being, not just as an employee doing processes, but scaling the principles. When you translate the principles down to protocols, make sure that they are relevant. That has to be very local, and that has to be scaled down. So that was a different answer than yours.
That is definitely an interesting reality to think about and to consider in the transformation journey. There's a question here that goes back into the psychological safety. I think this is very significant, especially in the times that we are in right now. So the question is, what was the approach that you did to improve this? And you know, like normally in a hierarchical organization, this is kind of a challenge to get into, because people come in with a mindset that we are going through this in a traditional fashion. But as organizations transform, definitely there is a challenge.
First of all, I think we in Denmark have a huge benefit, because we, from a cultural perspective, our society builds on trust. So somehow it's easier for us to lean in to this. We built the trainings for us around the topics, because we knew it would be one of the most important things. And we also realized that our feedback culture is actually not strong enough. So that is what we are focusing on now, because if we don't have that strong feedback culture, then you can really not get all the benefits out of this. And for me, the feedback and the psychological safety is so interlinked, so that you can almost not tear them apart. It needs to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, Pernille, for clarifying that. There was one question about support. Was there any external support coming from the Roche HQ or overall towards the Danish organization?
It has been a mix. We have used some agile coaches from the bigger Roche team. We also had inspirations. I mean, we have a lot of different divisions. Our local pharma organization and also our innovation center in Hørsholm, and I can see there are actually participation here. Some were running a little bit ahead of us, right? So we support each other. We have really started working also more networked and can use each other and support each other. So, for example, also building agile offices where we have people that can support the whole transformation across divisions in the countries. So, yeah. Yes, and yes. I would say, and then of course Erik was the external support that we had, right? So both internal and external, and across divisions and across countries.
Yeah, I think it's a big village, right? No one stands alone. There was a clarification question here around the donut model, right? So imagine the donut model having Teal, every department being Teal on its own, like a Teal dot, like what Erik said. Is it okay to assume that the Danish organization is one of those Teal dots? Is that the right assumption to make?
The Danish Diagnostics Organization all work with Teal as the Northern Star and the self-leadership. But there are teams that have a pre-assigned lead. I am a pre-assigned lead in one of the chapters. The change for us is that, I mean, my colleagues in the chapter don't come and ask me for decisions. They use me as a coach. They use me as a guide. I'm a leader in the organization, not a leader of my own chapter alone. So it's how we support each other, and the principles are the same if you are in a white dot or a green dot. All are working with the same principles, and that has been extremely important for us.
I'm curious now, how did you switch that mindset for people to have that sense of expectation that you're not going to take decisions for them? Because this is normally in a hierarchical organization, people expect that their leaders will take the decisions. And it's often a challenge, right, to switch that mindset that, hey, my leader is not going to take a decision for me. I will do it, but how do I get that permission? When do I get that permission?
Training and simulation and capturing each other doing something good or doing something out of line and saying, why you should do this. So training and observation of what actually goes on. It is tough. There's one of the questions above from Anna. What are some examples or manifestations of psychological safety you have seen in the last, for example, 8 months? The psychological safety and the decision making, they actually they fit together. The higher psychological safety, the better discussion about decision making you have. One of the key things that I have seen when people do that is that the balance in the leadership team between masculine and feminine language is good. It's really interesting to see the better discussion you have about decision making and listening to each other and psychological safety, then the balance from the masculine language and feminine, they actually levels. That's really interesting. And when you can point that out to people and say, now you're actually doing something good because you are exercising your feminine language. It is a vital sign for the psychological safety and paves the way for the discussion about decision making. It just, every time I see that, it's a vital sign of something new is going on. It's really interesting.
I'm impressed with what you said, Erik, that I guess it's about speaking about it. It's about observing and noticing it and nudging people towards more of that, right?
Yeah.
It's that slow, steady step of making people aware that this is a good thing. That's
one example on this. I was working with a guy, and he was starting delegating to an employee. And during that speak, he spoke in the old orange masculine way. I want you to do this for me. And then he actually stopped. And then he said, oh, sorry, did I just do what okay, can I do this again? And then he switched his sentence, the construction, his choice of words to be more teal, and with a balance of masculine and feminine sentence construction, his choice of words changed. And him being observant of his own behavior, it was like, yeah, now we're getting somewhere. It was really amazing.
Mm-hmm. This is very impressive, because when a person catches himself, that's also that increased level of self-awareness, that we don't go on autopilot with the words that we use, right? And it's easy to fall back into that trap. And so Erik, you mentioned that training was a huge part and you made it mandatory. What was behind that decision? Doesn't it feel a little contradictory towards Teal? Or was it like, okay, this is leadership, showing leadership that, we are on this journey together?
Do you want to go?
I would, of course, have loved not to take the decision to do it mandatory. But I think we did a mistake in the beginning. And I also believe we have been transparent about, it's also about decisions that doesn't work out, and we need to adjust because we made too many trainings available. And we need to think about our diversity in our organization. In diagnostics, we have a lot of people that are on the road every day and support our customers. So, to have 10 trainings within a short period of time, it's not possible. So when we then started cutting it down, it went in a different way, but at the same time, we did make them mandatory. I hope that we will not be able to take that decision in the future, but it was on our mistake that we actually prepared too much.
One of the things that we observed was that the teams in the middle of the donut, they developed unevenly in the same direction, but with different speeds. And in order to make that more homogeneous, it was like, okay, we need to give them a hand in the back in a more rigorous way. Was it contrary to this selflessness? I don't think so, because what we are talking about, how do you in one hand create alignment and in the other hand create autonomy, and that combination of both things is what we try to obtain by mandatorily training people in order for them to build some new habits, so that we can remove the hand from the back. So it's I think it actually fits nicely together.
Yeah, great, thank you. Let's switch gears a little bit, and there's a question. I'm not sure how familiar are you with the Birdserg way. Yeah. But there's a question around, how is Roche defining agile coach role? Is it similar to the Birdserg definition of an agile coach, or and somehow is there any differences? I'm not also the best person to know.
I know of Birdserg. I'm not sure I know specifically how the agile coaches work in Birdserg, so I cannot say that. But I know that in Denmark there are several affiliates working with variants of agile and variants of Scrum. What we have done together is in diagnostics is focusing more on Teal than on agility. Well, it's kind of built in, but we didn't specifically train people in Agile and Scrum until they asked for it. Yeah. And when that kind of need emerges, then that team or those teams were trained and supported in agility and specifically in Scrum for them to take it. And then they, over a period of weeks, they were supported with coaching. So I cannot say whether that's similar to the Buurtzorg Agile model. I don't know, but I see the similarities between the self-ledness in Buurtzorg and the systemic support, and with what diagnostics have been doing here.
Yeah, I can understand. There's always different expressions of how that shows up, because every organization has a different structure, has a different leadership model, and also has a different need. There's another question here, and I know Pernille, sorry, Erik,
it was also a realization about what fits us, because I mean, some of our new business, some of the business innovation, it fits very, very well to Scrum. But there were also some of the existing business that are, it doesn't really fit. And I believe that it is important to be able to be agile and flexible enough also to have everything within the organization. So that was a learning that the current underlying business doesn't really fit into to that way of working.
Thanks, Pernille. I move on back to some structural questions. And here there's a question about quality requirements. Pernille, you mentioned earlier about compliance as one of the main, let's say, important factors to take into account with governance, and also it's just a given, right? It's nothing to be debated about. How did you manage that into your transformation? You just accepted that this is reality and this is...
Yeah, I think that is how we are. That is not up for discussion. I think we are born like that at Roche. Compliance is licensed to operate. That is the guardrail, and then we have all the room in between, and there's a lot where we can do these things. So I don't see them contradict. Maybe if you measure us against other industries, but that is our framework within healthcare.
I think all of the domain areas of organizations that are in the highly regulated areas, they have nuances of that. There are some of them that are extremely highly regulated when it comes to, you have the active drug, you have the first human dose, you have testing, you have what you have until you go to market. That is regulated. Then you also have supporting processes, you have going to the customers, you have other areas that are less regulated. So understanding the nuances, back to the how do you translate the principles into protocols? How do you then take into account the different requirements for regulatory structures and finance and whatever? Taking that into account leads you to understand how you do that differently. And back to my point, that then requires you to make sure that you understand the friction. Because if in some area they are looser with their requirements because that's their business domain, and when they work together and observe friction with somebody who are tighter, then you need to understand that friction. So that's it's always looking at where does the friction appear, and is that a good friction or a bad friction, and how do we lubricate that? That's my take on it.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. Maybe following up on that, given that you have done the transformation with these things in mind, how has quality improved for your organization during the transformation? I mean, having gone through the transformation.
When you talk about quality, how would you define quality?
Very interesting question. I would assume that this question is about like the output and the outcomes that the organization is delivering.
Of course, I mean we have several measurements like customer satisfaction, like employee engagement, all these things that runs in the cycles for us. And we also, I mean, Erik inspired us also to use different kind of tools to measure how teams are doing. And I think all these things are linked to quality or to output. So customer satisfaction, employee engagement are the most important things. Yeah. And we didn't have the overall big ROS survey yet. And of course, I'm really curious to see it. But I would, from the former that were in the middle of the transformation, we are really having a high engagement in the Danish organization.
Great. Okay, so I'm just taking a time check. We have 7 minutes to wrap up the session, but there's so much more questions that are coming into Menti. But I'll take the liberty to pick one that's really interesting, I guess, for us and for many people. What was the biggest challenge you've had so far for Roche Denmark? And maybe what are the next issues, the levels that you're planning to address?
I think the first and the biggest challenge was the execution. Really to take that decision to do it in the middle of COVID, that was a big one to overcome. You, of course, as a leader, feel insecure because you are not in touch with the organization in the same way as you are if you are in an office. So that was a big one. That was a big challenge. Then the next big challenge was the disappointment when we launched that everyone would not be in a green dot with full teal from the beginning. And that was really interesting because at that stage people also didn't really know what this was all about. So after realizing that with being self-led, it's a big engagement that comes an expectation about taking responsibility. And that has been a challenge actually when teams start realizing what this is all about. So that we have been working a lot with in the second period, so here in 2021. And we will continue. I mean, some of these things about learning and taking iterations and the feedback culture and the psychological safety are on our focus right now. And I think in the beginning we had too many things on the plate. We have learned and we are more focused now. We need to prioritize.
There's a follow-up to that, and just want to squeeze this in because I think it's very interesting. There's that sense of transformation and the change, and you mentioned that people are starting to realize like what that all means. How do you overcome, or maybe how are you planning to overcome that culture switch that like, okay, now I understand, what's next?
You want to go with
that? Yeah, but I think it's about being or getting to somehow a plateau where you don't think about it as a change. It's adjustments, right? And of course it needs a lot of training. I think it will need a lot of time to get to that, but because of course there are still a lot of people that see this as changes. Are there more changes coming? Yeah, we change all the time, right? But
I have the mental image of when people have experienced Teal or good collaboration or a human organization. It's like popping corn. You cannot undo a popcorn. So once people have experienced that and they start sharing their learning about what it took and how it feels to have a popped corn, then it kind of spreads. and it's irreversible. Yes, there can be stupid days and misunderstandings and all of that, but insisting on really solving that problem in a humane, inclusive, and proper way, that I think that is contagious. And then to make sure that it sticks, to sharing telling the stories internally. How does it feel to blah, blah, blah? How did we make the mistakes and how did we overcome them? And also to understand how long time it takes. That productivity dip, the first 6 months, to actually talk about this. Yes, we know we're going into that, but on the other side of that, when we come to that plateau, we will accept during the journey that we miss that deadline, that this happens and so, but we insist on talking about it. We insist on mitigating and looping the frictions. Popping corn is contagious. That's absolutely so clear that it spreads.
Thank you. Thanks, Erik and Pernille. Thank you so much for your insightful sharing of your journey, but also answering candidly the questions that were coming up for most of us. It's truly been a lot to digest, and I do experience in some shape or form what you are talking about in my day-to-day work as well with our clients. So definitely I'm learning a lot from this conversation, and I hope our guests are also learning a lot from the conversations. We are almost at the top of the hour, but there's still an opportunity to continue the conversation. I know, I don't know, Pernille, if you're going to be around, but I know Erik is going to be around, and please do reach out to us, approach us in the spatial rooms and have a conversation. You can also find Erik very active on LinkedIn and with his podcast. So yeah, Erik, do you want to invite people to your podcast?
Yeah, we just launched our new Good Morning April podcast, in which both Tim Orshinger is guest, and also Vivek Menon. I saw Vivek earlier.
Yeah.
We are explicitly talking about teal dots in orange worlds in various nuances, and it should be available in your favorite podcast. So
yeah, thank you so much for this hour. It has been very enriching. Your experience tells a lot about the journey ahead. So I hope that everyone took a bit of courage, took a bit of inspiration, took a bit of insight, and some food for thought, for reflection later on. We will have a session, I think at around 7 p.m. CET, to kind of decompress and just reflect on what we heard, figure out what our takeaways are. And in the meanwhile, I would like to invite you to a session in the main garden between Ricardo Semler, the Maverick, meets Rebalancing Society, Henry Mintzberg from the MIT. And it's going to be moderated by Otti Fok. So you can imagine how interesting this conversation will be. I would like to invite everyone to join us over there in the main garden. And there's a concert at 6 p.m. at the lounge. Take your cocktails, your beer, and then we'll meet you at the terrace.
So good.
All right. So thank you so much, Pernille and Erik. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
And we see you around. Bye.
Bye-bye.